everyone, welcome to the channel. This is Perpetuality. I've wanted to make this video for some time. It's uncovering two of the watches that have been on my radar, and I do have my co-host here, Ollie, to check them out as well. Now, the SBGA 375 from Grand Seiko on the right is essentially the watch I've pined after for some time, but I wasn't ready to make the jump cost-wise. So I have the LX GMT with me, the Landmaster, to check out too. Now, I feel that the LX GMT Landmaster with the 5R66 movement offers value for money, as in the movement is a great gateway into Spring Drive. It was introduced back in 2006. Now the interesting part is that it carries the same specifications as Grand Seiko's 9R65 movement, with the only differences in finish work. That means you're still getting the 72-hour power reserve, the 15 seconds a month accuracy, with the only minor differences being that the 9R65A gets the beautiful Grand Seiko striping on the base plate and rotor, and more pelage work to kind of fancy it up a little bit. Now, I feel like both of these watches offer value for money in the perspectives of new and used, and I want to ask the question, is it worthwhile jumping into a Grand Seiko, or should you buy brand new a Prospex LX GMT, for example, and get that Spring Drive experience? Let's find out today. Rather than bore you with the specifications, I'll leave them on the screen for you guys to check out. The bezel on the LX GMT is an interesting one. It's a bi-directional, silent, non-clicking bezel. It has these north, west, south, and east compass points. The numerals that span in between these compass points are your degrees, just like you would read on a normal compass. Now, the way that you use this bezel is rather intuitive. Let's assume that the clock here is the sun. We'd point the hour hand to the sun, and the difference between the hour hand to the noon indicator and the halfway point of that would be south, assuming that we are in the northern hemisphere. That's really important. You have to think and remember which hemisphere you're in to use the compass bezel properly. Now let's imagine here, if we know where south is on the bezel, then we have a sense of direction to head back to camp. The opposite of that on the dial would be north. I think this is a rather interesting complication. Now let's assume that we are now in the southern hemisphere, so we'll reset the bezel. And once you have a sense of where the bezel is, you now have to point the noon indicator to the sun rather than using the hour hand. And the difference between the noon indicator and the hour hand would be your cardinal direction for north. I have a 6¼ inch circumference wrist, and this LX GMT being 44.8mm wide and nearly 51mm long is reaching the limits of what my wrist can handle. The case is quite similar to the Marine Master 300 in wearability. If you can pull off this watch or the Marine Master 300, then likely you'll love it. Now, mind you, I feel like there is wrist presence when we discuss this watch. It does get noticed on the wrist, and for good reasons too. I do understand that the overall thickness of the case is quite down to the Spring Drive movement and the GMT complication. Finishing is superb, as most of it does get that high polished surface that resembles Zaratsu. I can't confirm that it is Zaratsu, but it looks like it could be. You're getting drilled lug holes on the side of the case, and also the satinated top side of the lugs are done exquisitely, separating the high polish finishing very beautifully. The crown is a screw down crown that lends to its 200-meter water resistance, a feature that I appreciate, though the crown looks a little bit odd. Not seen a shaped crown like that before. I do understand that being titanium, the overall heft of the watch is the selling point despite its size. And you do feel that on the wrist. The titanium finish has diashield coating, and you can see that it takes on a bit of a brown hue to it. It actually heightens or increases the durability of the titanium surface which some of you who've owned titanium watches, you know that they're easy to scratch. There is a double locking mechanism for the clasp. Clasp is feeling a little bit tinny and cheap in my honest opinion, but it works, and it works extremely well with a very interesting glide lock system whereby you can ratchet out the clasp that you see on the inside right there and get the adjustment that you want. So it's a matter of just pulling it back, and then you can move between the little slots right there to get the desired fitment. Perfect for if you're wearing on a wetsuit, or just for the usage of everyday wear, especially if you're working and your wrist is expanding under just normal usage of wearing the watch. Now, mind you, the case back is quite plain. You're not getting an exhibition case back like the 375. It's rather dull in my honest opinion. The bracelet is quite confidence inspiring, being solid titanium with solid end links. There is a lot to like when it comes down to the way that this watch wears and feels on the wrist. It is titanium, which is, I think, a big selling point for how large this watch is. The LX GMT is great, but the 375 takes ergonomics to the next level. 46.2mm in lug length makes it more wearable. The bracelet is an interesting design with a double locking deployment mechanism, but the overall construction, mostly brushed with two high polished centerpieces. It resembles the Speedmaster bracelet of the past. The case finishing being mostly hand polished Zaratsu on the flank, it's a signature of the 44GS case. You do get a crown, with the inner crown tube also being polished with Zaratsu too. You can tell that a lot of the money went into the case design of this watch, and it shows. It is very beautiful to wear on the wrist, though the 44GS case looks like it is a little bit larger on the wrist. It does have the presence to go with it too, and I've been taken aback with just how beautiful this watch is to wear every day. If you're still with me for this weird comparison, you'll see that the LX GMT does not hold a candle in wearability and case ergonomics to the Grand Seiko, but the party piece of the LX is definitely in its heart. That movement with its jump hour adjustment, being it's a GMT and spring drive, makes it accurate and quite versatile for everyday wear. There's further distinction in the dials, where the Grand Seiko feels like it's a handcrafted piece of art, and this shows in the indices that have been polished from corner to corner with striations that seem to catch light iridescently. The Seiko LX, however, is no slouch. The indices, I can't tell you if they're applied or stamped. They look like they could be either or. The overall exquisite quality of the dial is not lost, especially when you look at the tight hand stack and the brushwork of the LX, the hands themselves too. I do feel like the hands stand out more in the Grand Seiko. They look like sharp weapons that have been honed to a fine degree. Where you look at the power reserve on the LX, it does get this handsome metal detail. And I do like the quality of the Grand Seiko's power reserve that seems cut out with concentric circles, very elegant in that manner. The date and the printing of the date wheel are almost imperceptibly the same on both watches. It's hard for me to tell the difference. I could say either one does hold up in that regard, but the Grand Seiko wins for dial quality. Just a quick note, the date window and the indices of the LX GMT are actually applied, and I will leave the source in the description below for you to confirm. Now, just to summarize, I did end up picking the Grand Seiko as my personal watch. I feel like if you're going to buy brand new versus used, the argument might be, say, to buy both used as they represent better values. And to be honest with you, the Grand Seiko, if you can get it for used in the $4,000 to $5,000 Canadian range, you would be sitting pretty with an excellent watch. Mind you, I feel like the LX GMT should not be written off. It is so useful with its GMT movement and jump hour adjustment, and being that it's spring drive is just icing on the cake. Now, if you feel like both these watches do something for you, then I think it's a matter of sitting down and thinking about which complication you value more. And if you care about the heritage case design, then the Grand Seiko and the 44GS case is pretty much the one to go for. Let's check out the Lume. Now, to unpack the LX GMT, it does have incredible Lume. I think there's just copious amounts of Lume material and it shines wonderfully, distinctive enough to tell the GMT hand from hour and minutes, which is usually the problem I have when you have a busy dial or a busy handset, but this works. Now the Grand Seiko does not have Lume, that's why I'm not featuring it here, but if you are a fan of Lume, this will definitely be not a disappointment at all. Thank you for watching, and if you like the content today, please consider subscribing, liking the video. I'll be covering more watch content in the future, and I appreciate your support.